So Gary Mathers, the team boss at the time, was trying to get me to sign a contract with Kawasaki. I just couldn't do it. I even told my dad. My dad said, "What do you?" They were offering me more money than he'd make in 2 years.
For the World Championship or for
no
AMA?
Superbike, AMA Superbike, yes. And they were talking about they were going to build the square, the 500 Kawasaki, and Cork Ballington was at least winning the 250, 350 championship. So, being a two-stroke guy, Kawasaki didn't seem like a bad thing. The last choice would be Honda, because the only thing they've done in the last 15 years is crash in turn one, right? And not even make it to the field. But anyway, I waited, and this is what happened. I was in my house watching my 79. I had this Trans Am. You ever see the Trans Ams?
That's Pontiac.
Yeah, Pontiac. Yeah, Pontiac. Really cool. Had a big bird on the roof and stuff. And anyway, I was outside washing my car. My mom comes out and said, "Freddie, the American Honda's on the phone." And Dennis McKay, and he said, "We'd like to add you as a fourth rider on a Superbike team. Now, we don't have a bike or anything, but we'll have one for Daytona." And I didn't even ask how much, and I signed with them. And so my exposure to the NR 500 so far had been watching them catch on fire.
But if you're thinking about World Championship, and that was looking like a World Championship effort, it wasn't looking.
It wasn't looking too good. Yeah, it wasn't looking too good. But I really wasn't thinking about that. It was more just I just kind of felt that that's where I should go. And so I raced, as we know, the match races and everything. So and this is where I'm leaning with this. In 1981, I had stayed with Honda at the end of 1980. Aaron Majiri came up to me. We were in Japan. We were sitting down, and the NR hadn't done anything that year. Our Superbike program, I'd finished second in the championship because, anyway, we won races, but we broke a lot, and I'd done well at the match races and things. And he said, "Listen, we'll let you have the contract." Now this was October 1980, but we'll build a bike. And we're going to start this company, but it won't be next year. Don't know how good it's going to be or anything, because we haven't built one of these before, and I said I'll stay, and I'd gotten an offer from Yamaha and Suzuki and stuff to ride, but I stayed with them, and so this 1981, we're still struggling a little bit on the Superbike, and I wasn't racing any international races. Irv had went to work for Barry Sheen to get some experience, so July comes around, and it's Laguna Seca. And so I didn't know this was going to happen until the day before, or 3 days before the event. They invited me to American Honda, and they took Irv, and they invited Irv there. And I didn't know this. They invited Irv. They sit us in this room at this table. And in the middle of the table was just a brown box. Just, about this wide, about this tall. And it's just sitting in the middle of the table. And they said, "We have two things to tell you. One is you're going to ride the NR 500 this weekend at Laguna." I thought, "Hey, that's kind of cool." And I said, and so I made a joke to Irv. I said, "Hopefully they fix the fire issue."
Probably didn't want to hear that. It was a Japanese thing.
Yeah, but it was just a joke between Irv and I. We joke like that. Now, what Irv said, my fire thing was one thing, but you'll hear what Irv said in a minute when they open the box. So I said, "That's great. That'd be great, Laguna." I had no idea what it'd be like, but I was really looking forward to riding. And so they said, "The other thing is we want to show you this engine." They took the crate off, and it was a 3-cylinder engine. The first thing Irv said was, "It's missing a cylinder." And it's reed valve, and Irv being Irv, and Irv, he's already calculating all the things, and everybody else at the time had gone away from reed valves and things. They were doing the rotary engines. Yamaha was changing to that. And so, but they had this engine, and that's all they had was this 3-cylinder engine. That was the very first thing that HRC had ever built, was what was in that box right there. And they were showing me this box, and I said, "Great, it's two-stroke." And so anyway, go to Laguna Seca that weekend, and I'm racing the Superbike, and I'm racing this in our 500. Excuse me. And so Laguna Seca, two things were working in our favor that weekend. One is it's a very short track. Not a lot of straightaway. So the first thing they told me, because we didn't have rev limiters at the time, right? So I said, "Well, what's the power band on this thing?" They go, "Wide. It's 13 to 20,000 RPM." Right? So first first thing I noticed is that I look down and the tack it starts about 7,000, RPM. It idles at 7,000. It's just like a little watch engine, And valve stems are very short. So it sits there and you blip the throttle and it picks up pretty nice. But when I got on the racetrack, I accelerate the first time, down the hill and I go through, and it's at like 13,000. I'm accelerating. It's just not moving. The thing just really, it had no torque at all. Well, 500 oval piston engine, 8 valves per cylinder, had no torque, but it would really start kind of picking up about 17,000. So from 17 to 20. So I really hadn't had any experience with this, but I said, is there any way we can do the gearing on this? They go, oh, we have transmission gears, right? So I said, great. What do you want to change? I said, I want to change it to where I'm revving it between 17 and 20,000 because that's the power band. Now, 3,000 RPM doesn't sound like very much today, but when you come off a super bike that the power band is 9,000 to 10.5, 3,000 feels like a lot, But it was 17 to 20. And so anyway, we geared the thing. I went out and practiced and started going a lot quicker. And I was shifting the heck out of this thing constantly. And so we get to the heat race. Well, now Kenny's world champion at the time. He comes over Laguna to kind of have a little fun, And it's a chance for the, Daytona being in March. East Coast people, West Coast would see us in the summer. So I'm on this NR 500. Kenny's out there. I get a good start. I get in front of him, and I beat him, right? 5 laps. He couldn't get around me. At first, he's then he starts really trying, because, he's thinking, and I beat him. And so I come in, you would have thought I won the world championship to these guys, because he had never won a race of any kind yet. And here I beat Kenny Roberts on this bike. And but the next day is the main event, completely different. It's a lot longer than 5 laps for one. And then so the bike lasted about 10. Because the truth is that 20,000 was not really my ending point, But I'd get to like 20 and a half or something, And so anyway, they were completely ecstatic though, because I was running second, but unfortunately it broke. So they decide that great. They had no intention of doing this. 2 weeks later is the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. So I thought, that sounds great. Now when I got to Silverstone, you can imagine what I thought about it. I thought, how ironic, right? I'm watching in my house in Shreveport, Louisiana at 17 on broadcast of the British Grand Prix, watching this bike not make it past turn 1. And 2 years later, I'm racing it in my first Grand Prix there. I thought, this is great, right? Until I went out that first session. And Silverstone is nothing like Laguna Seca. The gearing is so tall, right? And so everything I could manipulate the bike to do at Laguna was not there. And with the crosswind and getting on the hanger straight, I'd be tucked in on this thing and it'd be like about 19,000. As soon as I would pick it up off the small part of the tire, the RPM would start going backwards, And if the wind hit, it would drop. It was just... but it was an incredible experience, and I rode the wheels on this thing, and I qualified in the top 10, which was great, but no live start. So Carlos was the Italian mechanic that they had at the time, and he went on to work with Marco Lucanelli and different ones. But anyway, he was my mechanic, so he would not push start the thing. He would make me push start it every single time. So every time on pit road, I would push start it. The first time I tried to push start it, right, I pushed it, jumped on the seat, and it was a little too far this direction, skidded the rear tire, and I fell right over, which was really impressive in front of the whole Grand Prix grid, So anyway, I fell over. He picks me up, and all 135 pounds away at the time. And so he picks me up, and he goes, in his Italian, he goes, I'll fix you. We'll go out and practice tonight, me and you. I said, great. So he took me out in the back after Friday practice. We go way out in the back at Silverstone, and he gets on and he takes like 3 steps. He hits the gas tank with his chest as he's throwing his leg over. Bike fires right up, right? So I thought, perfect, I can do that. So I took 3 steps. First time I hit the gas tank, it about knocked the wind out of me, And it didn't start. but I practiced that every evening for about an hour, hour and a half. And that taught me how to push start a bike. Right? When I got the 3-cylinder, and I was never as good as fast as Ron Haslam. If you ever watch a video, Ron was always first. But I was usually right there with him, right? And I always give Carlos, I saw him last year at the Emla Classic event, and we laughed about that story, and he touched me on the chest, your chest still bruised, you know, and but it taught me a lot. In the race, I got a pretty decent start, got up to 4th, but it broke, you know, but it was a great experience.
HRC, I mean, their philosophy or traditionally, they've always wanted to do something different. The NR, the 3-cylinder, the upside down 4-cylinder. You almost need a special kind of rider. You need a rider with belief. So you saw that 3-cylinder engine. I guess, I don't know if their theory was, I mean, it proved that because it's skinnier and lighter, not got as much power, but it was an easier bike to ride, then it was successful. Did they tell you that's what the theory was? Did you have to believe in it? When you first started testing it, did you think I'm going to believe in this, or straight away did you think, yeah, we can win in this? Did it give you confidence?
Well, the thing is with Honda, and I learned this certainly with the NR 500 project, I could tell you even at that time, and this just a little bit I've been working with Irv, because my dad and I really never talked about suspension that much. Really. He asked me if it's moving around or whatever, and I might say a couple things. But when I first got with Irv, we spent so much time riding around in his van in the United States, going to races and doing events and stuff, and spending the weekend. I just absorbed so much, and so on the NR 500, even with some of the restrictions, the engine issues because of size and heat dissipation, they really had dissipating the heat. Trying to get that much power of a 500cc 4-stroke engine, the friction issues really created a lot of problems. They couldn't make the engine small enough to get the engine far enough down and forward to put enough weight on the front where it would steer. And so that was certainly an issue with that bike. And so when they built the 3-cylinder, the goal is to make a bike that handled, to make it narrow and aerodynamic and light. And Mr. Miyakoshi, who was the engine designer of the 3-cylinder, came from motocross. And so that's a lot of why the revalve, because that's the motocross engines, and some of the characteristics the 3-cylinder had, a lot of initial punch, acceleration comes from that desire, the way he built motocross engines, which was good and bad. Because in the very beginning, it had that, but it didn't have any over-rev. And you need over-rev in a 2-stroke engine like that, because at lean angle, and you're accelerating off the corner, and the 2-stroke 500 accelerates so abruptly that, you know, having to shift, if you run out of power and have to upshift and downshift, it really takes time, and that adds up. So the engine characteristics were, in the beginning, a little bit of an issue. But their whole premise of that bike was to build it where it was narrow, aerodynamic, and for the bike to be light. Now the funny story about that is the first Grand Prix we got to in Argentina in 1982, Mr. Aguma, who was our crew chief, he's sitting there and he's waiting for the weigh-in. You know, it's like a championship fight at the time, right? And you have all these bikes, and that's what they would do. They would weigh them in public because the weight limit was so low. It was like 100 kilos. I mean, it was just really low. Nobody would ever get that close, they thought, right? So everybody would try to make the bikes lighter and lighter. And at the time, we had the technology, front chassis was still the steel tube frames. And so anyway, the Yamaha comes through, and it's pretty light. And the Zoot comes through, and it's even lighter. Our bike was the heaviest.
And some of you may have heard the name Mr. Guma. He's, unlike Japanese, quite eccentric, quite mad, makes funny noises, and and I can imagine
he was making noise that you can imagine. He was like almost those bikes are crap, and in Japanese or whatever. And I'm sitting there, and so our bike comes through, and it's actually it was a pound light, heavier or kilo heavier than, and so part of that comes from it started out very light. But they hadn't figured out how to counterbalance the vibration, and that thing vibrated. The chassis were cracking. The first 2 times I went to test it in the fall of 1981 in Japan, either the day before I showed up or the day I showed up, a Japanese test rider was in the hospital. from the transmission locking up. I mean, and so it's like, well,
that's what Japanese test riders are for. Isn't it? Anyway, fast forward to I said, well, they should have behaved themselves. Speaking of moving on, I remember we were getting GPs on TV, and it was still that first, actually that Argentinian Grand Prix. I remember the British journalists had to get out of there because they got the last flight out, because the Falklands War was starting. But I remember it was kicking off. It was on TV, that race, and but still, I think there was Lucanelli, Haslam, and yourself. Suddenly, all these Hondas were all over the place, and the top half dozen.
What a great race that was between Kenny and Barry, and it's one of those days where in January I remember when they brought, because like I said, I never even got to ride in the fall in Japan, the trips I went there, and so in January they rented Laguna Seca for a day, and Paul Newman was there. A chance to meet Paul Newman. I got this great photo standing next to him. It was a great day. The bike was not very good, but it was cool meeting Paul Newman. And so he was there and driving in the Bud sponsored sports car, but it was just not good at all. And so we go to Brazil, and the bike improved in just a month dramatically, and then it's just a month later is Argentina. And so we just had no idea how we would do at all against other bikes, because the only place we had tested in Sao Paulo, nobody else had been there. And because we worked on Australia then, and there really wasn't that many tracks outside of Europe that there was much racing time on, where you had a lap time, somebody you could compare against. And so anyway, we were obviously going to Argentina, so they went to Brazil, and we tested there. It was hot, and we did pretty good against each other. But it wasn't until we got to Argentina in that first practice. And my very first practice, talking about push starting, my first push start, I fell to the right. We go out of the pits the first time. I go down to turn one, never make it past turn one, I crash, right? Cold tires in 100-degree heat, So I walk back, and Irv's there, he goes, well, let's try that again, but let's try to make it past turn. Anyway, so we go out, and so fortunately the weekend improved from that moment on. And I was almost quick as the first session, and it was amazing, just the improvement in such a short amount of time, from January to the end of March. There was no comparison how much different the bike was.
And development must have been pretty rapid.
Oh, it was, yeah.
The first race win came at Spa, and maybe at a track you would have thought the four-cylinders with a bit of top speed would have been a better bike, but dry race win and you fell off it again at the end.
I did. And to the right. So if I think about 3 rights, I told you I struggled in rights ever since Green Valley that day, But the improvement came from just their willingness to try things, and they really, you can imagine as they started figuring out the vibration issue, the power, they could then start getting so much more power. And just the technology improvement for, we went from the steel frames chromoly, and then of course aluminum chassis pretty rapidly, and into 83 just in a year. If you look at lap times as an example, talking about improvement, the chassis, suspension, and engine performance, 3 things on the motorcycle along with brakes. You increase acceleration, the thing needs to stop. You increase acceleration, initial throttle, you got to have more edge grip on the rear. But you get more drive grip up front than wants to push, right? So you're constantly chasing things around. In 1982, as a perfect example at Spa, I qualified second quickest at 2:40. Jack Middleburg was on the pole at 2:39. The only guy to break 2:40. It was our first time back it was my very first time obviously at Spa, but they hadn't raced in Spa in quite a few years because they had a problem, I think the year before, with the asphalt. And then before that, there wasn't the new part, and it'd been years since they raced the spots, or quite a few years. So anyway, everybody was pretty new there. But in the race, and that's why I love big fast tracks, you can really make improvements. In the race, I went 2:36, so I improved almost 4 seconds in between my practice time and the race time, and I won the race, right? So the next year we show up to the same track, and Kenny and I, in practice, lowered the lap time by 5 seconds from one year to the next. If you look at from, the practice time showing up there on that weekend in '82 at 2:39, 2:40 to there. And the battle between Dunlop on the Yamaha, Michelin on us, and we were on Suzuki too, were Michelin's. And then just the battle, once HRC got involved in '82, just the increase in technology and performance and pushing Yamaha on everyone. I mean, if you look at the dramatic increase in lap times from that first 3-cylinder in '82 until the V4 in '85, it's over 14 seconds. Yeah. And now that's going from the bias to the radial tire, which I did all the development there. That was such a huge improvement in performance, and so it was a real exciting time with a lot of what you see today. The unit Pro Lake rear suspension all came about on my '85 250 and 500. The radial tires, the box aluminum chassis, the rear ride height and added rake and trail. A lot of the numbers on my '85 bike that we got to that Mr. Ricky designed, when he designed the Evolution bike, the chassis for Nicky's Evolution bike in '06, same numbers.
Freddie, you thought about riding the TT?
What about riding the TT? And obviously never raced there. I've made 2 laps around it. This is what I said back then. Because when I came on in '82, I think it's probably, obviously it's well known that the TT wasn't a Grand Prix anymore after '77. Barry wasn't a big fan of it. There was all this talk. And so I would get asked the question a lot, well, what do you think about it? I said, if we had to race there or pay points, I'd race there. I mean, there's, I'm not one of those that bashes things. Just like when I raced, Kenny and these guys did not like 4 strokes. They call them, oil machines. And, I grew up riding super bikes. I think that, I ride anything. And so I never raced at the TT. I respect the guys who race there. I'm pretty happy didn't have to run a 500 around there, and that's just the truth. It's amazing the precision it takes. I did a lap this year at Manx, and I did one in '98, and it's like I was telling John McGinnis, it's just the how far you have to look ahead, and you pick a point, you just have to trust that point because it opens up.
One more question. Neil, do you ever race TT?
Yeah, but never happened. Yeah, I love going there. I must admit, I'd much rather sit in the bank. Graham Crosby said once, loves racing at the TT, but he likes going to Isle of Man even more and sitting in the grass bank with a pint of beer watching everyone else ride around. So, yeah, amazing event. And just talking about the TT, I really thought 5 or 6 years ago when it was maybe coming to an end, but it's bigger and better. Must-watch TV now. Every night it's on. It is just brilliant, and yeah, looking forward to going. But you've been round there.
I have. Yeah. And the thing is, this is true. I would never say otherwise. To me, it's part of the evolution of what we do. In fact, that event and events like that is road racing is what led to the opportunity for me to get to do what I do on closed circuits on high performance bikes, and so I think everything like that has its place, and I respect the people who want to do it, and a lot of times they find that interesting, because even though I don't do it, I respect the fact and because I know what it takes. I can imagine what it would take at that pace and speed, and it's like I said earlier, I ride because I love controlling the movement of the bike and the sensing and feeling all that dynamic. And so, that's just another level of that. Okay?
Just fast forwarding a little bit and taking nothing away from 1983 when you were pretty dominant and won the championship, and then they built a 4-cylinder for the following. Was that because you said if we need to keep winning, we need a 4-cylinder?
No,
we need more.
no.
What was that HRC again?
Yes.
We want to do something a bit.
Well,
different?
we knew we had to. at the end of '83, after Monza, after I won at Monza, I won the first 3 Grand Prix of '83. I told them we were in trouble because Yamaha had made such an improvement on Kenny's V4 from Kyalami until Monza that we, in fact, at the end of the Tag Grand Prix at Monza, when we killed the engine, they tried to restart it, wouldn't start up.